Imagine a world where East and West Germany remained locked in an unyielding standoff, where the Cold War never truly ended, and the fragile balance of global power stayed frozen in the late 1980s. The implications would stretch far beyond Berlin. Entire economies, political alliances, technological progress, and even culture would develop along dramatically different paths. Borders that once seemed temporary would become permanent. Freedom and oppression would coexist across the same continent. And by the time we reached the modern era, the world we know today would be almost unrecognizable. The story begins with a single point of divergence, a moment when history chose a different path. Understanding that moment is the key to imagining a world shaped by walls that never fell. By the end of this video, you will see a Europe and a global order profoundly altered, a world where every decision, every protest, every policy followed an entirely different course. If you want to see how one of the most famous walls in history could have rewritten the 21st century, keep watching, because the consequences are staggering. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell in our timeline, a symbolic and literal dismantling of division. But in this alternate history, the wall never fell. How could such a monumental change occur? One plausible scenario is a combination of political hesitation and brute force. In the real world, the East German leadership faced growing protests and an increasingly restive population. In our alternate timeline, hardline officials within the Socialist Unity Party stage a swift crackdown, bolstered by the Soviet Union, which remains cautious but willing to maintain influence in Eastern Europe. Mass demonstrations are suppressed. Border crossings remain tightly controlled. The wall stands firm, reinforced by new fortifications and a more aggressive surveillance state. This single divergence creates immediate ripple effects. In West Germany, hope for reunification evaporates. Economically, the two Germanys begin to diverge sharply. West Germany continues on a path of growth, innovation, and integration with Western Europe, while East Germany becomes increasingly isolated, trapped in an authoritarian system that resists reform. Politically, the Cold War, thought to be ending, drags on in subtle ways as Europe remains divided in tension and uncertainty. The wall's persistence also reshapes the mindset of the German people. Citizens in the West enjoy liberty and opportunity, but the constant reminder of their neighbors' oppression creates an enduring psychological shadow. Meanwhile, East Germans live under a regime that enforces conformity, discourages dissent, and rewards loyalty to the state. The world outside watches uneasily, aware that the Cold War may not be over, but uncertain how far the consequences will reach. The first few years after the wall's continued existence are defined by stark contrasts. West Germany becomes a hub of economic dynamism. Its industries, already strong, benefit from continued integration with the European community. Berlin West becomes a center of finance, technology, and culture, attracting talent from across Europe. Investment flows freely, and globalization accelerates in ways that further amplify the divide between East and West. East Germany, by contrast, stagnates. The economy remains centrally planned, unable to compete with the technological and industrial advances of its Western neighbor. Resources are increasingly scarce, and the population experiences restrictions on freedom of movement, expression, and opportunity. The state uses surveillance and propaganda to maintain control, creating a culture of fear and obedience. Daily life is defined by conformity, with citizens aware that any hint of rebellion could lead to punishment or exile. Europe as a whole feels the effects of this division. Countries that might have easily joined the European Union hesitate, uncertain how to deal with a continent still partially locked in Cold War tension. Trade with Eastern Europe slows as barriers remain high and political risk dominates decisions. Meanwhile, NATO is forced to maintain a stronger presence along the East-West divide, keeping Europe in a perpetual state of alert. The global balance of power, far from settling into the post-Cold War order, remains fragile and unpredictable. Culturally, the division deepens. Western Europe thrives on artistic freedom, consumer culture, and technological innovation, while the East becomes a world apart, defined by state-controlled media, restricted access to global trends, and a society that values conformity over creativity. The wall is not just a barrier of concrete and barbed wire. It is a symbol of the enduring ideological divide that continues to shape the lives of millions. The first ripple effects of this alternate history are clear. Technology progresses unevenly, politics remain tense, and society becomes increasingly polarized. Citizens on both sides are forced to confront the reality that the Cold War has not ended, that the world is still divided, and that their choices are constrained by forces larger than themselves. By the mid 1990s, the persistence of the Berlin Wall begins to reshape global politics in profound ways. NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe is delayed as the alliance hesitates to provoke East Germany or the still influential Soviet Union. Poland, Hungary, and the Czech lands find themselves caught between the promise of democracy and the threat of authoritarianism, uncertain whether to fully embrace Western integration or maintain cautious ties with the East. The United States, anticipating a peaceful post-Cold War world, now faces a new strategic challenge. Military commitments in Europe remain high as tension along the East-West border prevents the U.S. from reallocating resources to other parts of the world. Conflicts in the Middle East, including the Gulf War, are impacted indirectly as NATO and U.S. forces must account for the persistent European standoff. Diplomacy becomes more complex, and alliances are tested as no clear victory in Europe has been achieved. Economically, the effects are stark. Western Europe continues to globalize and innovate, while Eastern Europe, dominated by East Germany's sphere of influence, falls behind. Technology, infrastructure, and trade develop along separate tracks, creating two parallel worlds. The internet and early computing technologies, already slow to penetrate Eastern Europe, are further delayed, widening the gap between East and West. Corporations, investors, and entrepreneurs favor the West, leaving the East increasingly isolated. Social and cultural divisions also intensify. East Germans continue to live under strict government control, their daily lives shaped by surveillance, propaganda, and limited opportunity. Western Europeans, by contrast, enjoy freedom, travel, and access to the rapidly accelerating global economy. The wall, still standing as a symbol of division, serves as a daily reminder of what has been lost and what might have been. Music, fashion, media, and education become tools of ideology, reinforcing the split between two fundamentally different societies. The mid-1990s world, shaped by an unfallen Berlin Wall, is not just divided geographically. It is divided politically, economically, culturally, and psychologically. The Cold War, though less visible than in the 1980s, continues to define global strategy. Europe remains in tension. Innovation occurs unevenly, and citizens on both sides of the wall experience a reality shaped not by choice, but by circumstance. The persistence of the Berlin Wall forces humanity to confront the long-term consequences of division. Small political decisions, amplified over time, have created a world that is unrecognizable compared to our own, a world in which one of the most famous symbols of freedom never fell, and the global trajectory of history changed forever. By the turn of the millennium, the world shaped by an unfallen Berlin Wall looks strikingly different from our own. Europe remains divided, with East Germany maintaining a tightly controlled authoritarian state, while West Germany emerges as a powerhouse of technological innovation and economic growth. The European Union exists, but its expansion eastward is stunted. Countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary find themselves in a constant balancing act, aligning economically with the West while avoiding political provocation of the East. The Cold War, in many ways, never truly ended. Global politics are more unstable. The United States, still committed to European security, faces higher defense expenditures, maintaining bases and troops across the continent. Russia, though transformed politically from the Soviet era, exerts influence over East Germany and other Eastern European states, creating a persistent zone of tension, reminiscent of the late 1980s. Conflicts that might have unfolded differently, such as interventions in the Middle East or negotiations over oil and trade, are complicated by the constant strategic considerations of a divided Europe. Technological development diverges sharply between East and West. Western Europe accelerates into the digital age, with rapid adoption of the internet, mobile communication, and advanced computing. In contrast, East Germany remains technologically isolated. The state restricts access to foreign innovations, favoring its own controlled research and prioritizing military or industrial applications over consumer technology. This leads to a widening digital and economic gap, not just between East and West Germany, but between Eastern Europe and the rest of the world. Economically, the wall acts as both a literal and metaphorical barrier. Western corporations invest heavily in West Germany, which becomes a hub for finance, tech startups, and international trade. Eastern Europe remains constrained by bureaucratic inefficiency, limited foreign investment, and heavy state control. Citizens on the East side experience economic stagnation, shortages, and limited opportunities, while those in the West enjoy global prosperity. The cultural impact is equally profound. Western societies embrace globalization, multiculturalism, and open expression, while the East retains a rigid, state controlled narrative. Education, media, and art in East Germany reflect the government's priorities, emphasizing loyalty, discipline, and state ideology over creativity or critical thinking. In contrast, West Germans experience a flourishing cultural scene, marked by innovation in film, music, literature, and technology. The wall, decades after it should have fallen, becomes a permanent symbol of division not just in politics and economics, but in culture and society itself. The daily lives of citizens living on either side of the wall tell a story as dramatic as global politics. In East Germany, citizens are subject to pervasive surveillance, with state security monitoring workplaces, schools, and even private homes. Life is regimented. Careers, education, and housing are often determined by party loyalty rather than merit. Opportunities to travel abroad are rare and heavily controlled. Social mobility is limited, and dissent is dangerous. People learn to navigate a world where the government dictates nearly every aspect of their lives, from the books they read to the television programs they watch. In contrast, life in West Germany is vibrant and unrestricted. Citizens enjoy freedom of movement, career choice, and expression. Education is diverse and open. Technological adoption is rapid, and cultural life thrives. The contrast between East and West Germany is stark, and citizens are acutely aware of the disparity. This psychological tension creates a complex relationship between the two populations. Curiosity, envy, resentment, and a sense of historical grievance shape their perceptions of one another. Culture itself diverges in remarkable ways. Music, cinema, and literature develop along completely different trajectories. Western pop culture thrives on openness and global exchange, while Eastern culture reflects state-approved narratives. East German art often serves propaganda purposes, emphasizing collective achievements and ideological loyalty. In the West, artists experiment freely, challenging norms and exploring new forms of expression. This split produces not just different media, but fundamentally different worldviews, expectations, and even language use. As Western Germans adopt global slang and expressions, while East Germans adhere to more conservative, ideologically influenced forms of communication. Economically, daily life is equally divided. Western Germany experiences rising standards of living, access to global markets, and the benefits of innovation. In the East, rationing, limited consumer choice, and state-controlled wages create persistent economic frustration. Citizens in the East may enjoy security in some basic necessities, but the lack of opportunity and personal freedom weighs heavily. The wall, still standing decades later, is more than concrete. It is a living boundary that shapes daily behavior, ambition, and culture. By the 2020s, the persistence of the Berlin Wall has reshaped global history. Europe remains divided, with East Germany a stable but isolated authoritarian state, and West Germany a global leader in technology, economy, and culture. NATO's strategic posture remains heightened as the alliance continues to guard against potential aggression from the East. Russia maintains influence over Eastern Europe, using economic and political leverage to preserve its sphere of control. The consequences extend far beyond Europe. Global trade patterns are altered as Eastern Europe remains less integrated into the world economy. Innovation flows more freely in the West, accelerating technological advancement in ways that the East cannot match. International diplomacy is more complex, as leaders must account for the persistent East-West divide in virtually every global negotiation. Societies themselves are affected at a fundamental level. Individuals in East Germany grow up with limited exposure to global ideas, experiences, and opportunities. The psychological impact of decades under authoritarian rule shapes generations, reinforcing conformity and caution. In the West, citizens grow up in a world of opportunity, exploration, and international cooperation, but they are constantly reminded of the contrasting reality just across the wall. This alternate history demonstrates the fragile nature of freedom and the enduring impact of political decisions. A single structure, left standing, has the power to reshape the economy, culture, daily life, and geopolitics of the entire world. The Berlin Wall, once thought to be just a symbol of division, becomes the defining factor in a century of alternate history. The Berlin Wall never falling is more than a what-if scenario. It is a powerful reminder of how a single decision can alter the course of history. From daily life in East Germany to global political dynamics, the consequences ripple across decades, shaping technology, culture, economies, and international relations. The world of today, in this timeline, is familiar yet profoundly different. A Europe still divided, a globe still cautious, and society still constrained by a wall that never fell. It leaves us with a haunting question. How fragile is the freedom we take for granted, and how often do the walls of history linger longer than we realize? If you found this alternate history fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. In future videos, we'll explore even more moments in history where a single choice could have changed the world entirely.